world, and welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the educational collaborative of international schools, established 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre and I am the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box. Please let me introduce our experts today. We are delighted to welcome back Kevin Hawkins alongside Amy Burke, who are both representatives of Mindwell. They recently joined us at our online leadership conference with over 900 delegates, and the session was very well received and struck a chord with everyone as Kevin discussed commonalities and what do we want from our learners and students. At a time when safeguarding the physical well-being of our school communities has taken centre stage, there's also been a heightened awareness amongst many educators of the importance of maintaining and developing mental, social and emotional health for our students, parents, and for ourselves as teachers and school leaders. As educators around the world grapple with this sudden and significant change in their learning ecosystems, please join me in welcoming and handing over to Kevin Hawkins and Amy Burke from Mindwell to discuss this and further considerations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Georgie. We really just want to thank you and everybody at ECIS for the invitation to speak today, and also for the continued support of our work. We really appreciate it. We're really happy to be here. Just to let you know, my name is Amy Burke, and super brief about me is I'm actually a high school teacher, and I'm Canadian, originally from Canada. And for the last 8 years, I've been doing this work on supporting schools with well-being.
And my name's Kevin. I'm from England originally, but we currently live in Spain. And I've been teaching in the UK and then in Tanzania for quite a long time. And then I was middle school principal at the International School of Prague for 10 years until I went into this work with Amy and Mindwell.
So for our time today, we just actually want to invite you to take a little time to just be here with us. I know it's so easy to multitask and try to do so many things at once, but we really just encourage you for your own self-care and benefit if you want to just do this one thing at this time. So feeling free to close down other tabs or turning off your phone if you can, just to give yourself a little bit of space and peace during this. And speaking of tech, our internet has been a little bit shoddy this morning, so if it does cut out, Georgie and everybody at ECIS will still continue to host, and just give us a second and we'll sign back on. And before we get into everything today, I just also would like to invite you, wherever you are, just to arrive here right now and to take 3 intentional breaths, which we will also do. Great, thank you very much. So for our time today, we're going to be focusing on this main question: can times of disruption help us shift the focus of our schools towards greater well-being? And during this time of disruption, actually, we've been here in this small village in Spain, and we're very grateful to have been here during this time.
Yeah, we've been in lockdown for quite a while here, but now we have some freedom of movement, and it's a beautiful place to be. But you know, if we look down the valley from our house in the other direction, you can just see the city of Valencia there in the mist. We can't see it on your screen so well, but it's not far away from here. And it's just a constant reminder, has been throughout this crisis, Spain's very badly hit, how much suffering there has been to so many people, intense physical suffering for some people, and of course fear and anxiety, and just the sense of confinement in apartments and small families for such a long time. So we know that this has been happening, of course, all over the world, and depending on where you are now, depending on how hard you've been hit by it. But we've seen the effects of it and continue to see it spread around the globe at the moment. And, you know, as I said, we've come out of full lockdown now. Some of you may still be on full lockdown or even just entering it. Hopefully, many people are beginning to emerge from that at this stage as well. And we emerged, don't we, with this, I think, newfound appreciation that's been expressed for the people that keep us safe and healthy, so important to us at the time. It really brings back the importance of community workers, social workers, healthcare workers, and even people working in pharmacies and people getting our food for us, really highlighting how important these people are. And we often take this for granted. And you know, the same applies in many ways for teachers. I'm not sure how much appreciation you've been getting directly, but we would hope that parents, having been at home with their kids, will have really noticed how difficult it is and what an important job that teachers do. And we know that for you as teachers and school leaders, it's been a highly challenging time. This sudden shift to online learning has been huge. And also we've now got some schools going back into beginning to see how they can restart school again. Some people are already back. Some are managing online learning and physical learning as well. So this has been both a professional and a personal crisis, because we know that many of you through this crisis are or have been at home, may have been worried about illness with your family, parents, children. Your partner may have been out of work. Your job may be sometimes uncertain as well. So much uncertainty. And we know, don't we, that uncertainty is really the root cause of anxiety for many of us. So it's amplified a lot of those difficult feelings for many people. And as we go back into, you know, the new normal, whatever that's going to be, that continues to be a source of uncertainty and anxiety too. How will our classrooms cope with this as we move back into school? How are people managing to do it as these students in South Korea sitting entrance exams for a company assessment in a stadium? We know that things are going to be very different.
And we know that this time has brought up a lot of different emotions, obviously. And we did a survey of around 200 school counselors during this time to just really ask them, how are they doing? And you can see all of these emotions, and particularly the unpleasant and heavier ones of anxiety and uncertainty. And I know we've certainly encountered all of these during this time, particularly really some heightened anxiety for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not been easy. But also there have been some other more pleasant emotions like this gratitude and some people even talking about hope or hopefulness. And it is this time that is actually bringing new insights and understandings about how do we want to, you know, sort of re-engage in our world, and what do we want to create for our world as we move forward. And so that brings us to today and our time together, and our primary focus points will be about the importance of social-emotional aspects of teaching and learning, the role of mindful awareness in supporting well-being and driving systemic change, and also this sort of underlying theme of what is it that we are learning from this time of disruption.
Yeah, well, to help you to reflect on that through this afternoon. And just to get straight to that, there's this quote from Rahm Emanuel about never letting yourself, I'm just going to move something off the screen here, waste never let a serious crisis go to waste. Sorry, and what I mean by that, he says, is it's an opportunity to do things that you think you couldn't do before. And that's certainly what we've been hearing from schools and teachers and school leaders. Some school leaders saying, you know, this has really made us focus on what is really possible, because sometimes we think things are impossible, but actually we had to do some things that previously were impossible right away. And also, especially, what's really important? What is it that really matters to us at this time? And that's also been echoed in some of the media. We saw that Harvard Graduate School of Education, right at the beginning of the move in the USA to online learning, did a quick survey of what are the themes in educational media that schools are talking about and school leaders are talking about. So they surveyed the learning landscape in the educational media and saw, sure enough, that top of the focus for many schools and teachers and parents as well was the social and emotional health of students. Before worrying about getting through the curriculum and making things just be the same as normal, we have to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're in a good space to learn, take care of our children. Other areas came up, obviously stability and an important area of inequity, who is able to access these areas of community and taking different perspectives. But that emphasis on social emotional aspects of learning is certainly something that we've noticed, isn't it? In the last few years, we do workshops around the world with international schools, state schools, different educational organizations. There's a growing awareness, isn't there, I think, in many schools of the need to focus on student well-being, on understanding more about how to train for social and emotional aspects of learning.
So, you know, what is it that we mean when we talk about social emotional aspects of learning? And we use this definition from the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning from the United States, that really it's a process through which children and adults understand and manage their emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And we really support this work, and of course want to give you this very useful resource from CASEL. They put out this document that leveraging the power of social emotional learning as you're preparing to reopen and renew your school community. And really it's emphasizing the importance of these kinds of skills, and that we can take this opportunity of this disruption to really reimagine, like, how do we want our schools to be and how can they be? And in particular, social and emotional learning, you know, in our work, we realize that some schools seem reluctant to be able to bring this into their schools. And it's because of some very real issues of time pressure and pressure from the curriculum. But we know that the research does show, in fact, that when we do pay attention in the social and emotional aspects of learning, that does help to increase the academic scores. This is a piece of research from a meta-analysis that looked at over 30 years of social emotional learning in schools and social emotional programming in schools in the US. And there was, over the 30 years, that what they realized was there's an average of 11 percentile points on standardized test scores compared to those who didn't receive the training. And now we wouldn't say that we do this kind of work or promote this kind of work so that academic achievement can rise. I mean, that's a wonderful, it's important for that as well. But the reason why we promote this kind of work is for overall well-being. Because of course we know that you can't learn unless you feel well, unless you feel safe. And the wonderful thing is that it actually does enhance the academic learning. Because of course you can't learn if you don't feel well. And even more interestingly, a few years ago, a follow-up study came out of the effects of these people and students who received social emotional programming in their schools. And even, you know, 3.5 years later, their academic achievement was still rising, graduation rates had increased, and in the longer term, there are lower instances of drug use or emotional distress and conduct problems. And over the long term, higher social emotional skills and positive attitudes towards self, others, and schools, which is, you know, of course, so important and helpful. So when we look at well-being and talk about well-being in schools, we use this framework, and we use the 5 competencies of social emotional learning from CASEL of self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making as the core of what we are helping students to do. And not just students, but also teachers and parents. It's the whole school community that we really need to bring on board when we're looking at well-being in our schools. And for us more specifically, we use mindfulness as the foundation to all of this, or mindfulness-based well-being. And there's lots of research done now about how mindfulness can help support adults and young people, but we want to highlight this particular paper from our friend and colleague, Catherine Ware, who talks about the impacts of mindfulness and well-being on staff, on school staff. And actually want to also highlight that a couple of weeks ago, ECIS hosted a webinar from Pearson, when Ashley and Lisa led a webinar on the introduction basically to mindfulness and education and the value of mindfulness for adults in helping with their own well-being and stress management. And we really highly recommend that. We're not going specifically into mindfulness here. We're going to be looking at the broader picture, but they did a wonderful introduction. If you're more interested in looking at that, you can see the free webinar from ECIS. And also, I just want to also highlight that in our book, Kevin wrote a book that came out 3 years ago, Mindful Teacher, Mindful School. And in here, where we really talk more about some of more fully about the introduction to mindfulness in education and what it can do. And our publisher, Sage, what they've done is, because of all the online learning that's been happening now, been wonderful to provide a discount for the ebook until the end of June. And just a little bit more on the mindfulness in education is that when we're working with schools, we work with these three particular aspects of being mindful ourselves as educators and leaders, and even parents, if you will, being mindful ourselves, teaching mindfully, and then teaching mindfulness. And really, it's the foundation of being mindful ourselves that informs and overlaps the rest of this work. And of course, there are many examples around the world of young people and teenagers who are learning these kinds of skills in schools, which are really important. And there are wonderful programs out there that require some really good and in-depth training. And also there are ways that we can just have simple exercises to do what we call like season the day, to invite more moments of calming and reflection during our often very busy school days. And what all these programs are doing, and specifically and fundamentally, these mindfulness programs are looking at training the skills of attention, of self-awareness, and of emotional regulation. And these also, of course, contribute to the skills of empathy and compassion, and deep listening and collaboration and communication. So that's why we feel this work is so important. And all those, of course, contribute overall to well-being. And this move to well-being in schools is something that is mirrored in the wider world, of course. You know, it's not just Bhutan anymore who is dealing with or inviting well-being to be a primary focus for their community and their citizens. But of course, New Zealand's unveiled a well-being budget. Iceland's also done this. And it makes sense, doesn't it? That when you are taking care of your citizens, and that when the primary focus of your community is health and well-being, that really is the most important thing. And we can feel that and see that really now in this time of COVID disruption, how important well-being is ahead of even economics, because that stuff we believe will fall into line if you're first taking care of your people. So now I'll move it over to Kevin.
Okay, thanks. So also the OECD, I don't know if you know, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they brought out a beautiful document about a framework for education for 2030, and talking about outlining a new kind of education. They're working with many countries around the world on this already, in which we're really focusing on helping individuals fulfill their potential, but also helping to shape a shared future that will be built on the well-being of individuals, communities, and the planet. So when we move our focus of schools in this way, we're really shifting in a direction that is echoing some major changes that are emerging in the world today. This growing understanding that emotional intelligence has a huge amount of importance, not just in relationships, but also in our professional lives as well. A lot of companies are really beginning to promote and even recruit on the basis of looking for people with those strong emotional intelligence skills. But we also know, don't we, that schools traditionally are not so strong on this side of human learning. We tend to focus more on the analytical, critical skills. So it does need a shift of focus for us to begin to look at where are we going with schooling in the 21st century now. And we know that schools reflect an imbalance that we see in the world. The world is obviously extremely unequal, always has been. It's even more so obvious these days. There's economic equality that's so much in our face that we really are increasingly being asked to take more account of and to listen to people from different perspectives. There are all sorts of inequalities, and we're looking at school and learning and the human species and how it develops, I guess. Then we see really an imbalance of heart and mind. And what I mean by that is that, there's no doubting our cleverness, our intelligence as a species. The ability to send spacecraft to the surface of Mars and land them so gently is extraordinary. But we're not so clever, are we, when it comes to sharing the planet with each other? And we're not so clever when it comes to sharing the planet with other species. We know that we are over-consuming, and we know that consumption and wealth does not equal happiness. The WHO is saying that within a few years, depression will be the leading cause of ill health on the planet. So we know our lifestyle is unsustainable. We're increasingly aware of that. Most people, not everybody, but most people realize the importance of putting our attention into this area. The only really vital area for the future of our planet at this time is how are we taking care of this planet? And we realize that our existence on this planet is more fragile than we had previously imagined. And also we know that this planet will very soon be in the hands of those young people that we are talking about in our schools and homes today. And it's also a really important time to be focusing on the well-being and the mental health of young people in schools and universities. We know that there's, in recent years, been a significant increase in levels of anxiety and of depression, and that schools around the world are needing to take note of how do we help our students grow up to be resilient and well-rounded. And we know that schools themselves these days put a lot of pressure on students. The exam system, and sometimes in some countries, is very high stakes and filters down even to 5-year-olds. And also there are just very high expectations on schools, sometimes too high, that we just cannot maintain without causing harm to people along the way. So when we're looking at health and well-being for our young people and for ourselves, we're really talking about balance, a greater balance of heart and mind, that we need to take more account in our school systems, in the way we nurture our students, in terms of their overall health and well-being, made up of physical health, which is crucial, but also mental and social emotional health that doesn't always get the attention that it really needs. And if we want our children to grow up in a well-rounded, grounded way, if we want to really see the whole child and to help her to be able to deal collaboratively with the complex challenges of this century, then we need to help her develop her whole range of human capacities, not just a narrow range that for historical reasons we decided are the business of school.
So I think maybe just for a moment, we can just take a pause there and see maybe if there are any particular questions of clarification coming up, something that you need more information about. We're also going to do questions at the end, of course, but not sure, Jordy, if anything's come up so far.
No, nothing in particular. We did have one question about how can we perhaps encourage someone who's reluctant to try mindfulness. Mm-hmm. That's something that you've got some strategies perhaps that you can share.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We can talk about that at the end, I think.
Yeah, or we can address it now. What do you think?
I think because we're going to be talking more about mindful awareness as well.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we'll save it till the end, but remind us, Georgie, that can be the first one that we come to.
Yes, we'll do. And then there's just sort of, I've captured some of the great resources that you've shared here as well in the discussion board for people to sort of do further reading. So apart from that, I think we're ready to move on.
Great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're moving on, yeah?
Yeah, okay. Thanks. So when we come to looking at, and this is part of the reason we wanted to hold that question, because we're going to explore that a little bit more, and we'll talk about reluctance later as well. But when we look at change in education, we know that it's not easy to bring change into our school systems. In fact, it's very difficult. This is me with my teachers and students on the first day of the term in my last year at the school in Prague, where I was middle school principal. And sometimes we would be feeling that education is so busy and overstuffed and overpackaged that we can't do everything. There's always a demand to do more things, take on more things, but we also have to let go of things. And that brings us back to thinking about, what are we really doing in school? What is the main purpose of it? And sometimes on that first day, I would say to the teachers and the students, let's think about, what is a school really? What is a school? Because if you think about it on one level, it's just basically a building with a bunch of adults and kids. It's a bunch of kids and adults in a building. And so the question then for us is, how can we best spend our time together? And that really leads us to this, deeper question of what really matters, what is important to us. And so to help us prioritize, we need to keep asking those questions, because in some ways it feels like through the 20th century and even into the 21st century, mainstream education sometimes has lost clarity about the purpose of education, certainly about the deeper values of education. And so when we ask this question of parent groups around the world, we're really getting to this, you know, as a parent or as a teacher, what is it that you really want for your children? And I'd encourage you now just to spend a moment to reflect on that. I'd like to invite you to just bring to mind, it's not a mindfulness activity, it's just seeing if you can sit here with an image of a child. If you have a child of your own or a relative or a child that you teach, just bring one child to mind right now. See if you can just get the image of that child's face in your mind. And then just see what comes up for you when I ask this question. With this child in mind, what is it that you really want for them? And you may have a whole list of ideas coming up, but see if you can just allow one word or phrase to surface to the top and ask you again, what is it that you really, really want for this child? And feel free if you want to just to put that word or phrase into the chat, and we can see them as we go along. And just take a moment to just put that down. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe George, you can just, if there's anything coming up, you can, let's see if I can just see them.
Yeah, we've actually got some lovely comments here. So we really want self-love, compassion, happiness, stable base feeling of love and cared for, happy, calm and content, happiness, to be happy and healthy, to matter in this world. So there's clearly a theme here: high self-esteem and a sense of compassion, curiosity, to make a difference,
Beautiful.
to matter to themselves, happiness and contentment, empathy, confidence. Yeah.
Wow, lovely, thank you. And there are probably more coming in, but whether you put it in there or not, I think have a look at this list. This came from the first time we did this activity with this parent group. And this was the list that we got from them, which is very similar to some of the things that you're all putting forward as well, especially happiness and health and well-being and safety, confidence. All these things are so crucial. And, you know, wherever we go in the world, when we ask this question, what parents and teachers say, it's universal. It's not to do with class or culture or geography. These are human universal values that when we go deeply, these are the things we want for our children. Now, of course, academic achievement is important, but we never get parents saying, I want them to go to Harvard, you know, as when we ask the question in this way, because they may want that, of course, but on a deeper level, we want these deeper qualities and values for our students. And the question for us in some ways is, can we keep coming back to these deeper values? Because many of us have them in our school mission statements, and some schools do a very good job of getting closer and closer to delivering that. And this is our aim, is can we get a child's daily experience to get closer to some of these deeper values that we consider as being important and really mattering. And at the ECIS Leadership Conference that Georgie mentioned earlier, that question was posed about designing healthy learning systems, but also they were saying what we value should end up defining our ecosystems. But does that always happen? No, it doesn't, does it? And in fact, another quote came out of that meeting, which we should measure what we value, not value what we measure. And that's so true. How we've lost sight sometimes of the deeper purposes of what it is that we're trying to do here with young people. So in our work in this area, we see the importance of using this training and building up our awareness through mindfulness is one way of doing it. But can we become more aware of ourselves, understanding ourselves, but also more aware of how we collaborate and connect with others and relationships, and also bringing awareness to the systems and the environment in which we're operating and working and living and studying. Because then we can begin to understand the strengths, but also the biases and the weaknesses of the systems. And if we have a system that's unexamined, that's flawed, it's very often true that many people with good intentions come together into that flawed system where the assumptions aren't examined, and in fact end up doing harm to people, producing results that nobody actually really wanted. And that's so true of many of our systems these days. If we look at what's happening in science and in organizational theory and change theory, there's been a move since quantum physics away from mechanistic models of the universe and understanding into more naturalistic eco models. And that's beginning to filter a little bit into education these days as well. And we find it very helpful. We know where we got our industrial model of schooling from. And thank goodness schools don't look like that these days. And we have changed radically, but on some levels, we still carry some vestiges of that outdated thinking about what is important in learning. It still impacts the way that we learn and teach. And it makes it difficult to bring change. And I found that myself working in some schools. We really want to bring some change in our schools and not do the same old thing all the time. How do we make that deeper change? I was helped a lot by looking at what happens in business change, because there's so much research and background there. MIT in the USA in particular have done a lot of work in this area. Peter Senge, who wrote this amazing book, The Fifth Discipline, I found it really helpful in looking at my own school in Prague. And he went on to produce with educators another book called Schools That Learn. And this is really helpful because then we're getting people from outside education looking at schools as a social organization and challenging us on, what's really going on here? How does this system work? And when you look at it objectively, not on what we say schools do, what we want them to do, but what the actual outcomes are, you can find some surprising results. But these are some of the assumptions that Schools That Learn that came up with, that when we look objectively in this way, we can see that implicit in the way that schools work are some unexamined assumptions. That children are deficient and that schools fix them. That learning takes place in the head, not in the body as a whole. That learning takes place in the classroom, not in the world. That knowledge is inherently fragmented. That schools communicate the truth. That learning is individualistic and competition accelerates that learning. That schools are run by specialists who maintain control. That there are smart kids and there are dumb kids. That everyone learns or should learn in the same way. So these are designed to provoke us, as educators, to look at our own assumptions about learning on a deeper level, and to really see if we get to that level, then we understand the meaning of this beautiful quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because to have a strategic plan for change is one thing, but in a social, complex organization like a school, implementing that change depends upon all the human beings and our messiness as human beings within that setup. And when we come to look at the system, we're encouraged through things from MIT, like what's called Theory U these days, Theory of Understanding Change, to recognize that the system isn't just out there, that we are part of a system, and it's also inside us in terms of the models that we have and the unexamined assumptions that we carry sometimes. So this is from Otto Scharmer, who we'll let speak in a moment, but he's leading the Theory U movement at MIT. And he's saying that when we want to see the system for what it is, we also have to turn that beam of observation back onto ourselves. And Otto Scharmer and his associates were inspired by one of the first interviews they did, because this isn't based on theoretical university ideas of how change should happen. It's based on thousands of hours of interviews with people from business and organizational government change to look at what really brings these deep changes around. And this is one of the first interviews they had with a guy called Bill O'Brien, who said that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And this is such an important idea, that these inner states of our own have an impact on how we bring change. And although we're talking here in one sense about leadership, we're really talking about all of us involved in education. our role as thought leaders, as leaders with our students and with our teams. How do we begin change? And the invitation is to really begin to focus on our own inner state when we look at this. So I'm just going to see if I can skip to a very short piece of video here. Hope you can hear it okay, from Otto Sharma. These are all resources that are freely available from MIT if you're interested, but just talking a little bit for 2 minutes about this idea of change depending on our inner condition.
The success of what I do as a leader, as a change maker, depends on the inner place from that I operate. What is that inner place? The inner place is the quality of attention and intention that I bring into a situation. It's the quality of my presence. How can we cultivate that inner place? Basically, by cultivating, I believe, these 3 instruments of inner knowing, which are the open mind, the open heart, and the open will. And what I mean with open mind is the capacity to suspend our old habits of judgment. What I mean with open heart is the capacity to redirect how we look at a problem from my angle to looking at a problem from the viewpoint of other stakeholders in the system, particularly the stakeholders that are most marginalized. And what I mean, redirecting really is, an open heart really is about accessing the power of our empathy, of empathic listening. And what I mean with open will is basically the capacity to do this, letting go and letting come. Letting go of old intentions, old identities, and letting come of emerging future possibilities that stay in need of me to come into reality more fully.
So just to, before we transition to the next piece, I just want to address, with this open mind and open heart and open will, how do we do that? And of course, Otto Sharma has a whole plan and theory around it. And we'll just take a tiny piece of that, which is about taking time for stillness and time for reflection to be able to cultivate these capacities. And, this emerging future that he's talking about is actually happening, all the time, but it feels like really happening right now, particularly with this COVID disruption. And what we wanted to focus on is this idea of, what are we learning? And so I just want to bring us into a little bit of that moment of reflection where I will drop in a few questions and you just see what arises for you. So taking time to, just come back into and connect back in with your body a little bit. So maybe sensing what it is like to sit on this chair. We've been sitting on chairs, probably all of us, for a long time the past few months. So maybe inviting a bit of movement, just having the feet move a little bit, squeezing your toes, maybe even squeezing your hands and fingers and fists open and closed, a couple of rotations of the shoulders. And maybe again, just like we did at the beginning, having an intentional 1 or 2 deep breaths. Feeling free also just to turn the gaze away from the screen or even just closing your eyes for a moment. And just noticing how you are right now. How does the body feel? How does the mind feel? How are the emotions? just tuning in and acknowledging what's here. And as you allow for what's here to be here, I'm just going to offer a few questions as you sit here, just being and breathing. I'm just going to drop a couple of questions for reflection for you. What is it that you are learning from this time of disruption? And again, just allowing anything to arise. Maybe it's even some words or images. What is it that you are learning from this time of disruption? What is it that you want to hang on to? What do you not want to forget about this time? What really matters? And then maybe again, coming back to sense into the intentional breath and breathing that you're doing right now. If your eyes were closed, feeling free to open them. And if you want, we can see the chat now. So feeling free if you want to put, some people have already started to put some stuff in there, but what is it that you want to hang on to? If you feel like sharing, please feel free to in the chat. We've got wanting to hang on to a feeling of community and caring and patience, what you hold most dear, and valuing what you have. A strong statement about noticing and caring for myself during this time. What do you not want to forget? What is this disruption teaching you? The value of not worrying about materialistic things. I've learned how to be with my kids and husband again. The value of family, food, and home. I really appreciate, we really appreciate you guys sharing these things, slowing down. Wonderful. Yeah, we're learning so much. I know for me in particular, I've been noticing about particular negative thought habits that are not useful for me. So trying to work on letting those go. Thank you everybody for sharing. We'll get a chance to look at that chat more fully at the end too, because they're recorded. Mm-hmm. But in particular, also just wanted to focus on that last question too. I mean, there is what we're learning, but there's also, what really matters. And we're talking specifically about your school, so that when you are going back to school, or if you're already in school right now and working there, to come back to this question, right? What really matters in education? What matters in our school? And if you keep coming back to that question, that will really help to clarify your intention about how you want the school to be and how you want to move forward. And when you clarify your intention, it informs your actions and they come more clearly. So we really want to encourage that. And there are a lot of people right now that are looking at this time of disruption. The idea of disruption in educational change theory has obviously been around for a while, but the COVID disruption is really heightening that and amplifying that. And already there have been lots of online offerings about, reimagining education. Like, can this be an opportunity that we can actually make some of the changes that we know need to happen in education, for all of the reasons that Kevin outlined earlier, that it's not always serving our young people in the best way, or even our teachers. So we did that reflection about what you're learning, what you might want to hang on to, and what really matters, and encourage you to even write those down or even share them with somebody, right? When we share it, it can make it more real for us. So when we do our work with schools, we're really encouraging school leaders and teachers and even parents to look through this lens of well-being, that this is in their schooling systems, that this can be a central driver alongside the academic achievement, but that well-being really needs to have a a strong and stronger place in our education systems if we're really looking to create the kind of young people that we know are going to need to take care of each other and take care of the world. So again, we use this mindfulness-based well-being, and we can cultivate that, and it's really important to do so. It can help us, and when we have this coherent focus on well-being, and it can help really be a transformational factor in the development of school culture and the school ecosystems. We can change school culture. It's absolutely doable. You see the changes we've done in the past 3 months as a global community. We know we can do this, even if it's seemingly difficult. But understanding and taking care of ourselves is really essential aspect, is the most essential aspect in this process. So this idea of understanding ourselves, our minds, our bodies, and our emotions, it's a key life skill. And it's a key skill, like understanding, how does my mind work, my body work, my emotions work, how do they work together, how do they sometimes trip me up. This is not just like a fringe thing or an add-on course, but it really feels to us to be one of the most central things in education, how to help our young people understand who they are and how they are as human beings. And not just for the young people, that we also, what we want for our children, we also need for ourselves. Even pre-COVID, we've known that teaching is a really stressful profession and career, teaching, leading, and education, and even more so during this global pandemic. And we want to be clear here. We know that we can't get rid of stress, right? But we know that through an understanding of systemic stress, we can together collaborate and sort of be able to realize where the stress is coming from and make changes to be able to promote well-being and self-care as a primary factor in our schools. And it's so important that we do this as educators to sustain ourselves, and as parents, right? That in order to take care of others, we absolutely have to take care of ourselves, that the self-care really matters. And I just want to say that we know that bubble bath is really important, right? But when we talk about self-care, we're talking about the development of mental and social health and emotional health for all of us. That is a way that we can take care of ourselves, and we take care of those aspects of being human.
And physical too. And
physical, of course, yeah.
So we're just going to come to a close here. And we love this, what our friend and colleague Chris Willard says, that the best way to create stressed out kids is to surround them with stressed out adults. And of course the opposite is also true. The best way to create calm and caring, compassionate kids is to surround them with calm, caring, compassionate adults. And we know that's not easy. We can't get rid of all our stress, as Amy was saying. But when we think of a child or of ourselves, we don't often think of ourselves as natural organisms. We tend to not see ourselves that way, but we are as natural as a tree or a plant. And when you think about growing plants or trees, we don't, as a gardener or a farmer, you don't go to your plant and really focus on it and try and get that plant to grow. You pay attention to the conditions that it's growing in. Humans need water, they need air, they need sunlight. They also need nourishment, physical, but they also need to be nourished in their growth. And really the soil for a child, a growing child, is the people, the parents, the teachers, the siblings around that child. So how we are impacts how our children are, and how our schools are impacts how those children will grow. And so in summary, we're really saying here that when we talk about shifting the focus, we're talking about shifting the focus of education to prioritize mental and social and emotional mental health and well-being. And that the way to start that is, first of all, in ourselves. And that when we begin to do that for ourselves, we can then begin to impact the way that we teach. It brings it into our teaching and into our students and our schools. And in this way, we begin to change our school cultures and systems in a much deeper, sustainable way. And our hope is then that we can help produce children, young people that are wise as well as clever. Children that grow up knowing how to take care of themselves and to take care of each other. and to also be interested and engaged with and knowledgeable and wise about how to take care of this planet. And if ever there's been a time when a planet needed taking care of, then this surely must be it. So thank you for your attention this afternoon, and we really appreciate you tuning into this. And Georgia, we have a few minutes for some questions, I think.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Amy. I think that's really resonated with me in so many aspects, and from the comments and the questions that we have here in the chat box, I think this has been a really impactful sort of hour with you. Forgive me, I'm going to go back through and share some of these comments because I just feel that they really make a difference, and actually I think it leaves us reflecting on where we are at the moment, and as you said, how can we really make a difference? Apologies for the happy squeals in the background. It is actually my two nephews social distancing in the background, so please accept my apologies, although squealing's good. Yes, okay, so we have here, how can we encourage someone who is reluctant to try mindfulness? And another question similar, how do we deliver sort of counselling programs to meet students in an inequitable issues around wellness and needs?
Thank you for those questions, and I'll just start off if that's all right. Particularly around the one about how do you encourage people who are reluctant to try mindfulness. And I'd say first of all, I again want to remind all the viewers of the webinar that ECIS put out a couple weeks ago that looked more fully at mindfulness in education, or mindfulness for adults as well. And first of all, I just say, as an broad answer, is just to say you can't really force anybody to do anything if they're not wanting to try it. So we always, in the work that we do, are ensuring that anything we do or suggest in even our webinars, that it's invitational, that we certainly don't want to make people feel like they have to do it, because that will turn people off. And that more specifically, when we're working with teachers, we look at it on a really practical level about how mindfulness can support stress management and be helpful for positive mental health. So we use a lot of the research and our own personal experience of using it, but you definitely can't force anybody who's not wanting to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, no, just also strategically, I know from my own experience, if you, especially with colleagues, and you're in that school yourself, if you push it too hard, you're going to get pushed back, So the thing is to focus on what you can do for yourself and for the people that you are working with, and then see that begin to grow. And what it normally requires is champion teachers who are working in this way, who then get interest from somebody with some authority, some school leaders who realize the value of self-care and well-being. And when you begin to get that, then you begin to make space for it. But we know many people are on their own in schools really trying to fight this battle. But getting help from other people is really important. And to go slowly, just to go slowly.
And just for the school counseling part of that, I just want to make the recommendation as actually the International School Counselors Association, who provide wonderful resources for everything. Actually, we can't recommend them highly enough, and that maybe some of those questions about the particular school counseling and inequity stuff can be addressed through them.
And we do need to talk more about that question with the questioner, I guess. But certainly we're thinking of children in disadvantaged areas. Mindfulness has unfortunately been associated with kind of the rich, middle class, upper class, and it really is a benefit to everybody. It's universal. It's just getting it into those areas in ways that's acceptable to everybody. And I've seen it used in primary schools in really difficult areas, and parents and children getting so much from it and really appreciating it in very different cultures and religions. So it definitely can work in all sorts of different situations, but how we do it has to be done sensitively, and it has to start with feeling it internally for ourselves before we try and take it to other people.
And accessibility is a main issue that we are looking at, to the mindfulness community is looking at, making sure it can be more accessible to everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
Thank you both. I think I would agree with you there. And actually, what we will make sure is we can share some of those resources and the counsellors link as well, Amy. I think that would be really helpful. Derek Harwell has mentioned, he's obviously saying that the COVID-19 situation may allow us to reinvent school, and SEL will be huge in going back to. We have an opportunity to change and restart it all. Are there any suggestions, again, about how to push for a change in the stress of our school? I think we've kind of covered that, but you may have some additional comments.
Well, thanks, Derek, and great that you're here. Yeah, absolutely. But there's an opening here. That document from Castle has some really good practical tips. But I mean, it all starts, I think, with a conversation. I know somebody put in the chat, I saw just briefly that, you know, kids might getting fed up with people asking, well, how's your mental health today? You know?
Yeah.
So it is about recognizing emotions and talking and giving kids space to readjust. But it's not just about that. It's about a whole lens of well-being, about prioritizing it. So it really starts with a conversation, with people having their own experience, getting together like we are here today, and we find this commonality. We go to this heart level and we have, you know, a decent dialogue, maybe that's structured with some parents and students and teachers or wherever you feel best to start, that can then begin to grow. And we're asking that question of how well are we as a community? How well? We're not saying this is what you have to do. We're inquiring into how well are we? How balanced is life in general? How are we doing in our school environment? What can we do to improve that well-being? And, you know, like Otto Sharma said in that video, really going to the most marginalized stakeholders at a certain point when you're ready to get their input into what is it really like to grow up in this environment, and what can we do to improve it? It's a meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, and you talk about the communication and dialogue, and it's like, and the way we communicate. So it's not just another meeting or another thing to do, but inviting moments of reflection and of sharing and of open-heartedness and meeting people as human beings, not as like teacher, student, parent, like really meeting each other on an equal level, an equal plane, and listening, right?
Yeah.
Learning to listen. And that's a key skill that can be trained, and that where mindfulness can help support really deep listening.
Yeah, teachers in schools are really interested in that whole deep listening aspect. And in our book, we give more ideas and tips based on experience of other schools about how to develop those conversations and the kind of processes and protocols you can use for those. If you're really interested in there's a thing from MIT, there's the Presencing Institute where Otto Sharma is from. They launched a new initiative through COVID called Gaia, G-A-I-A. And all their resources are free. They've got it's an amazing process. 6,000 people joined in this 14-week journey. And there's so much there to learn about how we can bring these deeper ways of change into our systems.
And just on another practical level, just to add, and we can send this resource through as well, that through the Yale School of Emotional Intelligence, or Center for Emotional Intelligence, they have another plan, practical tool of creating an emotional intelligence charter for your school. And they show you how to do it, and they give you the questions, and really practical and really meaningful ways. So it's like a mission, but it's a little bit deeper than the mission.
And just one more thing, briefly, I know Derek spent a lot of time in Amsterdam, just to show that these ideas are not just, you know, theoretical ideas in business change. In Amsterdam, when they had a teacher shortage last year, they got 16 schools together, used these theory U approaches and had a quality of education experience that involved parents and school leaders and teachers. And you can read about it. We're writing something about it now, actually. You can send a link if people are interested. And they used these processes over this week and really got to a deep level of understanding and communication. Didn't solve all their problems immediately, of course, but it did lead them to a different place. This is, instead of having a strike, they decided, you know, we can actually do something here that will change the way that we operate and deal with some very challenging issues of teacher shortages. And it was powerful.
Thank you both. I'm just keen to kind of get through questions here. Michael shared that apparently Second Step is releasing an adult SEL curriculum soon, and investigating that, so that could be something to consider. And some other sort of sharing of resources from Yale. So what we will do is make sure that we can share out anything that you've referenced today, including the Gaia. Thank you, Kevin, for popping that on there, GAIA resource. Just going through last few questions now. Bear with me one moment, I'm conscious of time. We did have a question, I think, from Michael about are you planning to bring the presentation and importance of these issues to the attention of school leaders at international school organisational conferences such as CIS and MESA and ECOS? I did respond about the fact that you actually were one of our keynotes recently at the ECIS Leadership Conference. Is there any plans for you to join any other conferences coming up shortly?
If we are invited, we would be absolutely thrilled to share this with others.
Okay.
We'll be at the International School Councillors Conference that's a whole month in October. We've actually writing another book at the moment, and we haven't really signed up for much, but we are very interested in getting this idea out to leaders, and we want to work with leadership training as well to really bring that.
We don't know exactly when we're going to have it, but we will have an online Mindwell course in the next few months as well.
Yes.
Excellent, it's a great opportunity now to sort of wrap up. Thank you both so much. It's always very profound and very authentic when we're joined by you both. So we hugely appreciate you taking the time to sort of be here. And obviously a lot of people are busy. We will be sharing out the recording for those that can't attend. This webinar is a series of free webinars offered by ECIS, and we're focusing on providing sort of free support for schools and students internationally. We are actually the founding members of the International Schools Recovery Forum, which is alongside Together Schools and Clear Path Alerts. So you can visit that site as well for sort of more practical resources alongside sort of mindfulness. I think there was one kind of key comment that you shared with me right at the end, and for everybody, that is, if ever there's been a time for us to consider and stop and take reflection, I think I can't imagine in sort of our history where we've ever had such a global impact. And please take care of each other and be kind in all aspects and ways of life. And on that note, thank you both so much. Please, yes, sign up for your newsletter at mindwell-education.com. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for creating this space. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.